see American power tips the balance. We're going to look at the American experience fighting in the First World War and how the United States contributed to the Allied victory. It's very kind of important to kind of the end of the war and the U.S. role in it. Okay? Historically speaking, basically before World War II, the United States had always maintained a very small peacetime army, and then if it needed it, it would build up a very big one quickly. And this is what we do here, right? So when we enter World War I, only 200,000 men are actually in the U.S. Army. That's not a lot. When you think about it, the Central Powers had mobilized 25 million soldiers, and the Allies had mobilized around 40 million soldiers. That's 200,000 is really just a drop in the tail. Okay? So we have to issue a draft, right? Selective Service Act of 1917 drafts 3 million men. About 3/4 of those men end up in Europe, sent there to fight, see combat. And it's important to remember, we get through this very quickly, right? 9 months from draft to battlefield, right? That's a very quick time. Our men were not very well trained. They didn't go through a lot of special military training. They weren't really as grizzled or experienced as the armies of Europe at the time, who had been fighting World War I for, again, 3 years. Okay? The other problem, right, is France is across the Atlantic Ocean of the United States, right? That's where the fighting is. So you have to use convoys, right? This is the U-boat threat is a big one, right? German U-boats are able to attack shipping, right? You remember from the Lusitania sinking, right, that a lot of people have been killed by U-boats. So we developed the convoy system, right? So we built a lot of ships, right? We have to build lots of ships so we can very quickly, very easily get the supplies and the men to Europe to fight the war. We use the convoy system, right, which you can see kind of here. Keep all the merchant ships very tightly packed together, and destroyers generally would kind of sail around the larger merchant ship fleet, and the destroyers are basically ships designed to go after submarines, right? And this really worked exceptionally well. German subs really didn't do a very good job of breaking the convoy system, and because the British had mined the North Sea, right? German ports are on the North Sea, so submarines could go under the British blockade, but the mines were there, which inflicted even greater losses on the German submarine forces. It really limited the effectiveness of this weapon for the Germans. Right, only one U.S. ship was actually sunk afterwards. All right, when we get there, General John J. Blackjack Pershing is the one in control of the American Expeditionary Force, or the AEF. Right, if you remember him, he was the guy that had been running around Mexico for a year trying to chase Pancho Villa and fighting battles with the Mexican army. He is probably the most famous, most experienced military commander in the U.S. at the time, and that's why he gets the job. American soldiers are known as doughboys, and this comes from nicknames. So they wore these white belts in their uniforms, and they cleaned them with this dough that was used. So the British and French soldiers called them doughboys. It's a nickname that's stuck. Originally, right, so you have the trench warfare. The British, the French, and German army have been basically savaging each other for 3 years. The British and French armies are very depleted. They're very kind of worn out. They're very thinly stretched. The British and French commanders wanted to use American soldiers as replacement forces, right? And that if this British division needed a couple thousand troops, we put Americans there. If this French division needed, we send them there, right? Basically, use Americans to fight alongside / within British military units, French military units under British and French command. Pershing didn't really like that, right? They did it at first. Pershing wanted the Americans to fight under American command and under him, and kind of as one unit. So eventually, Americans are given their own section of the line, which they end up playing a very, very decisive role in the end of the war. Okay? Pershing, again, it's this kind of new, the greenness, right? They're not kind of worn down by 3 years of war. The Americans are enthusiastic, they're fresh, they're excited, they want to fight the war, they're ready for battle, although they're not very well trained. Pershing doesn't like trench warfare, right? He thinks that the trench warfare has limited the aggressiveness and the initiative of the Allies, that the war has worn down the British and French to be too defensive and too cautious. It isn't like that, right? So when Americans get there, they attack, right? They fight aggressively. He has them on the move. He has them going. And they're able to, in a couple battles, they really help turn the tide for the Allies, right? Because it becomes very necessary here. When Russia, the Russian Revolution, knocks Russia out of the war, right? So the Russian Empire falls apart, the Soviet Union pulls out of the war. Germany, which had been fighting this two-front war, is able to send all of their forces from Russia to the Western Front, to France. Right? So in spring of 1918, all these German reinforcements show up. The new German force attacks. They drive the Allies back. They're only about 40 miles outside of Paris. And again, that's the whole goal, to try to knock France out of the war. But U.S. troops are able to counterattack. They're able to push through the German offensive, stop it, and start pushing them back. Right? And this is a major move because if the French and British had not been able to stop the Germans could have knocked France out of the war, could have won much more favorable peace terms, right? And the American forces are the reason that they're able to stop the German defense. This is important because America is a major power and wants to be a major part of the negotiations to end the war, right? And if America is not kind of at the table, having these big, large contributions to the war effort, the European powers probably won't give them the same important role in the negotiations for peace. So the way the Americans fight in the Argonne Forest, I showed to Terry, basically earns the Americans a prominent place at the negotiations, right? Argonne, 120,000 Americans are killed there during that battle. This is partly a result of Pershing's constant attack, right? Not wanting to dig in, not wanting to get into trench warfare, but it's able to push the Germans back. Okay? Germans lose, but in the end, 48,000 Americans are killed, 62,000 die of disease, and 200,000 Americans are wounded overall in the war. And so Americans do pay a pretty heavy toll for the brief amount of time that they spend fighting in the battle. World War I is the first real modern war. This is kind of a lot. Trench warfare, I'm sure you talked about this last year in world history. Right? The armies would dig in, they'd be in these trenches, which were terrible, terrible living conditions. Right? They were wet, they were soggy, they would get trench foot, which would people's feet would be getting eaten away. You'd have the birth of the machine gun, right? Bullet guns that could fire hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds a minute, right? Before this time, it's mostly bolt-action rifles, kind of one shot quickly, repeating rifles, but nothing that can fire hundreds of rounds, boxes of ammunition at a time. These machine guns really change the way wars are fought and the amount of bullets that are going to be going out on the battlefield. The British developed tanks. Tanks are used, firstly, very poorly by the British, kind of as random infantry support, but the British realized when they massed the tanks, they could drive over barbed wire and trenches and kind of clear paths for infantry to move through, which became a very, very important part of the war. You can see how much tanks changed by World War II and how tactics around tanks and becomes probably one of the central weapons of the Second World War. And artillery, before every assault during the World War I, there would be a massive artillery barrage. And this is kind of how they would try to soften up the lines, because of the trenches, because of other things, didn't always have the biggest effect. But the entire landscape of northern France was just absolutely devastated by the amount of shells fired. And you even see Big Bertha, which was a gigantic railway gun, basically a battleship's cannon mounted on a train car that the Germans used to, it's like the shells were like the size of a very small car, like a go-kart. Like they were gigantic. They could hit Paris from where they were firing at certain times. And this massive slaughter. Right? Soldiers lived in just terrible conditions. It was filthy, it was dirty, there was lice, there were rats. Poison gas delivered mainly through artillery shells, mustard and chlorine gas. And it was a horrible weapon that hadn't really ever been used before. Gas masks became like a routine part of a soldier's uniform in the First World War there's so much death and dying that you can't get all the bodies off the battlefield in time. So you're surrounded by death, you're surrounded by destruction. The shell shock, right, the constant exploding of shells and bombs and things going off around you, the constant fear of death. This is what we would call today PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Right? This is kind of from soldiers being exposed to these really terrible conditions, and they just called it something different back then. And at the end of the war, there's a great flu pandemic, Spanish flu, which kills another 40 million soldiers. All these soldiers come home, they come with this flu, it spreads it around the world, right? And it kills millions of people after this war had just killed so many. A few American heroes, Alvin York, who started the war as a conscientious objector, right? He didn't want to fight, believed the war was immoral, so he didn't do it. They forced him to fight. Him and his unit captured 132 German prisoners. He was armed with a pistol and a rifle, and he killed 25 Germans by himself. And this kind of made him a hero. He won the French, basically the French Medal of Honor. He became a major American celebrity for the war. Eddie Rickenbacker was a World War I ace, right? You have the advent of airplanes and aerial war, right? The Red Baron, again, more of that kind of aerial war. You have a new kind of hotshot kind of way to fight a war with your planes. By the end of the war, there's 22,000 British bombers, right? The Air Forces grew big, and they kind of seen that you could use these bombs to really affect the way the battlefield goes, right? So you really see a modern war in the First World War. Germany is unable to take Paris in their spring offensive. The French, the Americans, and the British pushed them back basically to the Belgian border. By the fall, November was not going well for Germany. Their economy has been in total war mode for 4 years, and the economy just cannot keep up. The British blockade has starved out the German people. Right? There's not enough food, there's not enough supplies, people are dying of starvation, famine kind of conditions in Germany. The German Admiralty orders the German Navy to sail out of port and go do battle with the British and try to break the blockade, and they all refuse. They refuse to get on the boats. The city of Berlin revolts against the German government, the German Kaiser, the socialists there that take over, declare a German republic. German soldiers and workers kind of declare revolutionary councils, right? You have kind of a lot of people rebelling against the war. And the German government, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, so November 11th, 1918, decide to sign the Armistice Agreement, which ends the war. 4 years of fighting over 30 nations. Again, World War I is fought not just in France, not just in Russia, but in Turkey, in Austria, in Serbia, in Cameroon, in Iraq, in Saudi Arabia. Right? It is fought throughout the world. Okay? You have 26 million dead. Half of them are civilians. 20 million people are wounded, poison gas, blinded people, soldiers lost arms, legs, body parts. There are 10 million refugees kind of spaced out the world. Northern France is destroyed, northern Italy is destroyed, northern, a lot of Russia is destroyed, right? There's people that live there that are homeless, that are gone, their homes have been taken out, and cost $350 billion. Right? This is, they call this the war to end all wars for a reason. They can't imagine after World War I ends that there could be a worse war, that anything else worse could happen, that this modern warfare could really even be, could even come back. If you have any other questions, make sure to ask your teacher. Thanks for watching.